The 3rd of November, 1943. Wangerooge, German Bight. Inside a low concrete bunker behind the dunes, a Luftnachrichten crew leans into the green glow of a Freya early warning set. The operator steadies his hands, sweeps, and then stops. A thickening line gathers far out over the North Sea. The controller calls upstairs to the plotting room. Bearings, range, rate. The line should resolve into discrete blips as it nears the coast the way it did all summer. It does not. The trace seems to breathe. It fattens, thins, then blooms again, a wavering curtain of returns that will not hold still. Upstairs, the chalk wands stall over the grid squares that lead toward Bremen. The phone rings. Hanover Night Fighter Control wants clarity. The young sergeant at Freya cannot give it. At 27000 feet over the grey chop, the first boxes of the U.S. 8th Air Force approach landfall. The day's plan is precision against northern targets under cloud. Lead ships from the 482D bomb group carry the new H-2X radar under their bellies, a hard round radome that hums in the cold, painting towns and rivers on a cathode tube for the navigator. Lieutenant General Ira C. Eaker has pushed his bomber force to keep pressure through the weather window, and the Pathfinder crews have trained to make that possible. The crews call the set Mickey. It sees through cloud. It does not care about haze. Down on the coast, Würzburg Riese, dishes near Jeva attempt to refine tracks for the Kamhuber line, the defense grid. General Joseph Kamhuber, built from Denmark to France. Würzburg once gave clean gun-laying quality plots to flak and fighters. Today the scope crawls with parasites. A junior technician suggests a failing valve. The chief shakes his head. The pattern flickers with a strange regularity, as if stitched with invisible thread. A rumour has circulated since July when Royal Air Force heavies burned Hamburg Window, the British called it. Strips of foil thrown into the wind that make radars see a forest of ghosts. The sergeant has never seen it in daylight from Americans, until now. The first B-17 seconds cross the coastline. Below them, narrow rivers wind through marshland, perfect on the H-2X scope. Behind and above another formation opens bomb bay doors just long enough to let bundles tumble. Each bundle bursts into clouds of thin aluminum strips cut to the wavelength of German radars. The strips spin and glide and scatter in the cold air. On German screens the line thickens. It fractures into ragged bands. The plotting floor in Hanover mutters and wipes and redraws, then wipes again. Someone orders a switch to visual tactics near flak belts. Wild sow, the single-engine fighters that hunt by sight over burning cities. A desperate improvisation tried first in 1943. But clouds hang low. Sight is a rumour. In the American lead ship, the navigator aligns the H-2X picture with a training overlay. Bridges, docks, rail yards are bright smudges where water and concrete make strong returns. The bombardier breathes, slow listening to the droning engines and the clipped interphone calls of the formation. It feels mechanical, almost clinical, hold heading, hold altitude, ride the box through the turn to the initial point. There is no duel here, no romantic chase. There is procedure. And an unseen escort in the ether that removes the enemy's hands from the table. German controllers try Zame Sau, the controlled swarm that had once fed night fighters clean vectors. The calls stack up uselessly. Freya bearings wobble. Würzburg cannot hold a stable single target long enough to hand it to guns. Flak opens by clock and habit over known routes, bursts scattered high and low, black and white cotton puffs, groping for a formation that keeps slipping behind a moving wall of false echoes. A staff officer at the divisional command post scratches a note, mass interference source, unknown coincident with foil. He underlines foil twice. The bombers roll in. The lead Mickey ship steadies. The bombs fall through cloud in long, deliberate strings. Somewhere behind, more bundles of foil glitter as they descend, each strip a tiny mirror that tells a lie to a German machine. The return tide flows back toward the C-column after column engines, hammering contrails smeared into a corridor. On the coast, the Freya operator watches the line thin, then dissolve into a haze that dwindles, and finally fades. His headset crackles. He does not answer at once. He lifts his hands off the controls and looks at his fingertips as if they were the problem. Outside the bunker, the wind drives sand against the blast door. Inside the room smells of dust and warm electronics. The line does not come back. Night falls over Hanover sector and the phones do not stop. Controllers try to rebuild order with voice and discipline. Bearings are taken by habit, plotted by muscle memory, then erased when the smear slides somewhere new. The Kamhuber grid was designed for neat handoffs inside narrow cells, with one Freya for early warning and one Würzburg for gun laying. It worked when a raid looked like points on a graph. Tonight, it looks like weather. In the plotting room, grease pencils squeak, then lift in frustration. A captain dictates intercept lines to Zame Sao, groups that cannot hold a lock long enough to climb into the right air. He keeps talking anyway because silence feels like surrender. At Oldenburg, a maintenance chief pulls the back off a Würzburg Riese cabinet and checks voltages. The set is healthy. The noise is not inside the box. Out to sea, something has poured metal into the sky. He writes a line in the log that will read flat in the morning, clutter heavy. Target discrimination lost. East of the coast, a B-17 pathfinder keeps station, with a cold patience that has nothing to do with courage and everything to do with procedure. The H2X cathode ray tube shows a lopsided oval that matches the map sketch of a rail yard. The lead navigator cross-checks timing. On the right cheek window, a gunner stares into cloud, seeing nothing, listening to the net. A few ships call flak, then it fades. The jammers hum. In the bomb bay hang racks of bundles that are not bombs. When the toggles drop again, more foil falls, and the wall thickens behind the American boxes like a moving storm front. Hamburg, July 1943 had been the proof that foil worked. Word of that lesson moved across the channel and into American kits as winter turned to 1944. By early spring, dedicated radar countermeasure ships rode with the combat wings. The crews called the airborne jammers Carpet. The designation in the tech orders read AN-APT-3 and later marks. Their mission was brutally simple: fill the Würzburg bands with noise until the narrow pencil beam spread and lost its aim. Against the longer-range Freya warnings, Mandrel noise jammers from escorting support aircraft could force the first bearings to wobble. Chaff strips, cut to the half wavelengths the Germans used, made sure every gust of wind created fake targets where real ones were supposed to be. The German response moved just as hard. Staff officers pushed countermeasures into the line while pressing research shops for something that could see past the fog. Operators tried new scan rhythms. Flak batteries shifted to barrage patterns by clock and altitude band rather than precision. Controllers urged pilots to climb above the reported stream and dive through it by eye. Wild sow tactics were supposed to be for nights lit by burning cities. Cloud killed that plan. Zame Sao needed dependable vectors. Chaff killed those too. In a signals hut outside Bremen, a senior radar officer traces a finger along the frequency tables of Freya and Würzburg and draws arrows into clear space. He makes a note to test a different pulse repetition frequency at dawn. February 1944 brings a series of strikes that the air crews will later call Big Week. The industrial belt from Leipzig to Regensburg to Gotha feels the weight of the 8th Air Force and 15th Air Force in quick succession. The boxes do not come alone. Pathfinder ships lead through weather. Carpet ships ride the streams. Foil falls in sheets. What German radars detect is a saturation of their own senses. Intercepts go late. Gun-laying data comes dirty. A night fighter pilot lines up on a silhouette that keeps changing shape because the trace behind it is not a single airplane at all, but a curtain of slow-falling metal that pretends to be many. In a signals classroom near Berlin, instructors pull a Freya training scope onto a stage and show cadets a film loop of a clean approach, then the new reality. The clean loop has neat, separate blips. The new loop has a rolling bank of snow. The instructor speaks evenly. He tells them to trust ears and discipline, to use time-distance rules to ignore the noise. He does not say that the enemy can make more noise any time they choose. He does not need to. Cloud banks over the North Sea break at sunset. A returning formation drags long contrails toward England. The crews will debrief mark hits and misses record flak zones and note the way the German guns seem to tire or guess or give up. No one in the debrief room calls it easy. It is heavy work, and the empty bunks are proof that nothing about this is safe. But there is a new fact that everyone understands without saying aloud. The bombers did not fly alone. There was a shield in the spectrum, invisible to the eye, blunt to the ear, that turned a tight technical defense into a man trying to fight in a snowstorm. Spring 1944 Dutch coast, a signals hut that smells of damp wood and ozone. A senior engineer spreads a coastal chart and taps 5 circles drawn in pencil. Passive stations, no transmitter at all. The code name is Klein Heidelberg. The trick is brutal in its simplicity. Listen for British broadcast towers across the channel, then watch for their echoes bouncing off aluminum skins at altitude. Chaff blinds active sets. Chaff cannot blind a reflection you do not emit. The operator adjusts headphones, twirls a gain knob, and the trace on the training scope steadies into slow sinusoidal beats. A controller leans in and whispers that at last they have a way to see through the snow. Over the Zuiderzee, a B-24 pathfinder tucks into the stream at 22,000 feet. The H2X tube gives a fat, bright signature where water meets K. The radio room carries a jammer rack that hums like bees. Carpet pours noise into Würzburg bands. Somewhere behind escorts and support aircraft keep Mandrel alive against Freya. The navigator checks drift, then winds the clock forward to the initial point. He does not know the name Klein Heidelberg. He only knows that the flak sounded late last week and later the week before. Controllers try to fuse the passive bearings with the smeared active plots. A lieutenant thinks he has the geometry calls, vectors for Zamesau groups clawing for altitude through layered cloud. A minute later, the passive lobe fades, and the active scopes go to snow again as a new curtain of foil falls into the cell. The voice circuits clog with pilots asking for fresh headings. The lieutenant keeps talking steady and firm, because that is what the book demands. He circles an aim point on the map with the tip of a pencil hard enough to tear the paper. June 1944 drags the defence net south and west, bridges over the Seine rail yards at Caen, fuel dumps behind the bocage. The 8th Air Force comes on poor weather days because H2X makes poor weather workable. Pathfinder ships mark through cloud. Bomb lines creep inland while the coast still burns. On a coastal bluff near Cherbourg, a Würzburg dish rides a concrete pedestal and slews by habit even when the screen looks like a winter storm on a bad radio. The battery commander stands with field glasses and watches bursts walk across nothing in particular. He orders barrage by altitude bands. The crews set fuses by stopwatch and thumb. The sky answers with dark puffs that hang drift and thin. By late summer, the oil war takes centre stage. Meersburg-Lohne-Brukspolitz. A B-17 group bores into a corridor of grey, the lead Mickey ship locked to a river bend that matches the overlay on the navigator's knee. The interphone is clipped and dry. Bombardier ready. Doors open. Release on lead. Behind the lead boxes trail clouds of foil that descend like slow rain. Below, a flak regiment tries a new rhythm, short salvos, then silence, hoping to catch the interval. They get fragments of the stream, then lose it again when the echoes thicken. In the plotting room, a staff major writes 2 words on the corner of a chalkboard and underlines them, Mass Tätig. Autumn brings longer nights and a different kind of pressure. Night fighter schools teach cadets to trust the ear, to read the feel of the set, to push through noise. A veteran instructor stands by a Freya trainer and runs a film loop of clean points, then the new storm. He does not complain. He tells them to fly to the clock when the scope lies. In a back row, a young operator copies frequency tables into a notebook and adds a margin note. Enemy sets variable. PRF change. He draws a small arrow toward a blank space where no German set currently lives. In the ready room of a Pathfinder group at Alconbury, crews crowd around a chalkboard. Target time route altitudes expected flak. The operations officer raps the board for attention. He points to 2 tail numbers flagged as RCM escorts and says the quiet part out loud, "Stay close to these ships and your scopes will be cleaner." The crews nod. Nobody believes in clean. They believe in workable. Engines cough to life in the dark. Props bite wet air. The line of taxi lights crawls. Somewhere over the Ruhr, a Würzburg operator thinks he has a single clean target. He refines again, calls data to guns. The next sweep shows 3 targets at slightly different ranges. He knows that is impossible for one aircraft. He feels the answer before he says it. Strips. He drags a palm down his face and keeps working the dials because the guns outside need numbers whether they are good or not. He writes the time in the log. The pencil digs a groove. The return leg runs along a lane of weak moonlight. A waist gunner stares past the webbing of the window and watches chaff glitter between the stars like a slow falling constellation. He will remember that image years later, a false sky inside the real one. The debrief will record bursts here, a fighter there, a ship gone silent at this coordinate. The invisible escort that rode with them does not go on the victory board. It is procedure, tone settings, checklists and timing. It does not look heroic. It works. Spring turns to summer, and the interference does not ebb. In a workshop at Rechlin, the covers come off a few MG-62D Würzburg Riese. Panels line the bench like armor plates from a dismantled animal. An engineer with carbon pencil stains on his fingers flips through a fault book that shows neat solutions to neat problems. Drift valve failure, humidity. None of them explain a sky that turns to snow on command. He dials a different pulse pattern, then another. The trace tightens for a breath and collapses again when a tray of fresh foil is dumped into the airstream 100 kilometers away. He writes a calm line for the record interference, consistent with enemy measures variable in strength, synchronized with raid. On the Dutch coast, a signals officer lectures young operators on lobe switching and patience. He teaches them to ignore the first bloom and look for a steady heart inside the fog. It is good doctrine, and it sometimes works against thin chaff. Against the heavy curtains that the Americans are now willing to spend, it buys seconds at best. By the time a steady heart is found, the stream has already passed the handoff line and is setting up on an initial point with a pathfinder using H2X to see through a ceiling that would have grounded last year. Alconbury, Bassingbourn, Thorpe, Abbots. The briefings in England fold electronic escorts into the routine. 2 tail numbers are marked for RCM duties. The crews do not cheer. They make room. An APT-3 carpet rack gets one more check. An operator rides with headphones pressed tight, listening to a sound like wind in wires as he pushes noise into the Würzburg bands. H2X crews run their Mickey scopes with the new overlays water, and city blocks glowing in grainy familiar shapes. There is no drama in the ritual. Switches up, signal alive, hold the box. Big Week has taught the lesson, the oil war makes it permanent. Merseburg Luna on 12 May, 1,944 Politz on the Oder, in June Brooks later in summer. The German net stretches, thins and then tears when the weather is bad enough to erase the eyes, and the Americans come anyway. A flak commander outside Halle tries a predictive pattern by clock and altitude band and gets a few strikes that sound right. He marks the zone with a chinograph pencil. Next, past the returns go grey again, and the sound comes late. He stops telling himself it is a maintenance problem. Night schools keep training. A veteran instructor stands beside a Freya trainer and sets a loop running. Clean points first, then the storm. He tells cadets to use the clock and not to chase ghosts. A hand goes up in the back. The cadet asks about passive fixes. The Klein-Heidelberg method the Dutch station briefed last month. The instructor nods. Yes, when the British towers are in the right place and the wind does not throw the lobes off, you can sometimes ride a bearing through the noise. He does not add the part they all know sometimes is not enough when the plots must feed guns in minutes. On a night in August, a Zachme Sau controller near Munster catches a glimpse he trusts. He calls a vector that sounds confident, and 2 night fighters turn into cloud. The next report from the pilots is confusion. The shape they fell on broke into pieces, then vanished. The controller stares at the Würzburg screen and understands that the shape never had edges. It was a fall of metal that used his own set against him. He writes the time and the call signs and a flat sentence about target lost due to clutter. He underlines nothing. In a Mickey ship over the Ruhr, a bombardier rides the scope, while the lead holds course on a river bend bright as a coin. He cannot see the city through the murk. He trusts the circle on glass and the cadence of the navigator counting down. Bomb doors open, release on lead. The ship jumps as the racks go light. Behind him the stream is still laying a false sky. A waist gunner presses his helmet to the window and watches the foil fall like slow rain. He will describe it as that years from now to someone who will think it sounds beautiful. It was not. Autumn brings longer nights, and fuel is tight across the Reich. The oil strikes pinch hard. Intercepts go late more often than they go well. In a signals hut near Kassel, a staff officer drafts a circular that urges units to vary, scan patterns, test, alternate pulse, repetition, preserve tubes, and keep morale. He writes Störungen in the subject line and dates it with care. He does not promise a cure. At dawn, a maintenance chief at a coastal site leans in the doorframe and drinks something that tastes burned. The set behind him hums with the warmth of working electronics. It will give a clean picture when the air is clean. The enemy has learned how to make the air dirty. He taps ash into a tin and watches gulls ride the wind over the grey water. The phone rings. He goes back inside and answers as if the answer will change. Late 1944, a night fighter dispersal near Münster. Ground crew wedge a small receiver set into a cramped cockpit cables, snaked to a scope that looks like an afterthought. The passive box is called Naxos. It can hear the British 10-centimetre beacons from H2S. Sometimes it can turn that whisper into a bearing. The pilot nods through the brief climb to a gate altitude, hold a course along the plotted stream, use the ear when the eye goes blind. He rolls and lifts into a ceiling that folds almost to the ground. Somewhere above the Bomber River moves by clock and checklist. Somewhere below the cities are dark. Across the border, a pathfinder crew in a B-17 rides a different frequency world. The H2X scope hums at 3 centimetres, a shorter wave that the German receiver does not love. The picture resolves into bright coins, where rivers bend and factories sit in neat rectangles. Carpet jammers in the stream pour noise into the Würzburg bands. Mandrel keeps the Freya bearings soft. Chaff drifts in long curtains that fall so slowly the wind has time to spread the lie. The lead navigator taps a pencil on an overlay and nudges the pilot 2 degrees right. The bombardier breathes steady, waiting for the count. A controller in the Hanover sector tries to marry the old and the new. He has active sets that snow on command, and a handful of Naxos bearings that come late or not at all. He calls Zame Sau vectors that sound confident. The replies from the air are thin and tired. A pilot reports a shape, then nothing. Another reports lights that were stars. The controller lowers his voice and keeps issuing headings because procedure is the last solid thing left to hold. Factories at Leuna and Berlin are struck again in winter weather that would have scrubbed a year ago. The oil war forces pace. In a signals hut near Kassel, a note is drafted in careful script alter-scan rhythm. Test alternate pulse repetition. Conserve tubes. Maintain morale. The line about morale is not a formality. Crews who once trusted the crisp pencil beam of Würzburg now work by prayer and stopwatch. A battery commander orders barrage at fixed altitudes and times. Bursts hang and drift. The echo that should be a hard point comes back as surf. February 1945. The rail nodes across Germany get hit under a single name. The crews will remember for its simplicity. Clarion. Targets everywhere, low-level and medium-level fast, strikes against the skeleton that still moves fuel and guns. The higher streams drag their invisible escort with them. On a coastal dish near Emden, a Würzburg operator thinks he has a single, clean return at last. Refines, calls data, then watches the trace split and thicken, as a new fall of foil turns one aircraft into a ragged phalanx of ghosts. He notes the time and writes unzuverlässig in a small hand he hopes no one will read aloud. In a lab at Rechlin, a team tests a prototype for a better look at 3-centimetre targets. The parts are late, the alloys are poor, the drawings bear the scars of hurried redesign. The engineer in charge does not complain. He tunes the set, watches the line sharpen on the bench, then turns to the field notes that never match the comfort of the room. Out there, the enemy does not let the air stay clean long enough to be clever. He closes the log and dates the page. The date matters more than the words. March brings the river. The crossings of the Rhine pull the net south, then east. Bridges at Wesel and Remagen turn into magnets for every gun and every surviving fighter. The 8th Air Force flies bad weather comfortably now. A pathfinder ship holds a corridor by H2X picture, while the boxes step down their loads onto marshalling yards that feed the front. German controllers move night fighters like chessmen on a wet table. Bearings smear and slip. Passive sets hear too much and too little at once. The controller watches his watch. He listens to pilots who report cloud and light and no shape to hate. In a coastal bunker, a Freya operator catches the first edge of a returning stream. He follows it as long as he can hand steady on the dial, telling himself the line will resolve. It does not. It fattens, thins, blooms, then breaks into snow. He takes his hands off the controls and sits very still. The headset breathes in his ears. He has detected something for hours and learned almost nothing. The realization comes without drama. What he sees is not the raid. What he sees is what the raid chooses to let him see. Dawn puts a grey bar on the horizon. Engines cough alive at English fields. Trucks move drums. Crews run fingers over checklists with the same tired care they used yesterday and will use tomorrow. In the debrief rooms across the sea, there will be maps with grease pencil tracks and small X marks where a ship did not come home. No one pretends the shield is perfect. It does not need to be. It only needs to turn the enemy's best instrument from a scalpel into a mitten. The operator in the bunker files his log. The last line is flat, heavy interference bearings, unreliable target, picture indeterminate. He clicks his pencil, close stands and opens the blast door. Outside, the wind blows sand along the concrete like static across a dead channel. He squints into it and understands the title of his night at last. He did detect the Americans. He just did not see them. April 1945, a coastal bunker near Cuxhaven. Power is still good. The scope still warms with that soft green glow, and the North Sea looks like a band of noise even when the sky is clear. The Freya hand has a pencil ready for bearings that will not hold. He writes times anyway. Across the room, a Würzburg Riese dish slews by habit its narrow beam, trying to pin a single point that keeps splitting, fattening, then washing out. The chief says nothing. They have all learned the shape of this defeat. It looks like snow called down on command. In Berlin, General der Luftnachrichtentruppe Wolfgang Martini reads the overnight signals summaries with a flat face. The notes sound the same in every district. Heavy interference coincident with enemy streams. Bearings unreliable, gun-laying data late or unusable, passive fixes intermittent. He underlines nothing because nothing here is new. The countermeasures they forced into the line after Hamburg 1943 have not been enough. Chaff turned precision into weather. Mandrel made the long-range warnings soft. Carpet filled the Würzburg bands until the pencil beam lost its edge. H2, X, led whole formations through cloud the net could not pierce. Procedure had beaten improvisation, and the record shows it line by line. At Alconbury, a pathfinder crew takes a last spring briefing. Target route altitudes. 2 tail numbers are flagged for RCM escort, with AN/APT, 3 sets, and later marks. The operators in those ships will ride, gain, and keep noise on the German bands from assembly to target and back. The Mickey navigator checks his 3 centimeters overlay for river bends, docks, and rail grids. The ritual is as familiar as lacing boots. Switches up, scope alive, hold station, release on lead. Nothing about it feels cinematic. Everything about it works. Over the northern plain, a Würzburg operator calls a clean return, and the battery bends toward it. A minute later, the trace fractures into a ragged file of ghosts, as fresh foil falls in a new curtain. He knows the lie by its rhythm now. He passes numbers to the guns because guns must have numbers even when numbers are guesses. He notes the time and writes one word in a tight hand, unzuverlässig. The chalk on the plotting floor squeaks, then stops. A controller rubs the grid with the heel of his hand and leaves a grey blur where clarity used to live. Remagen is already behind them. Wesel too. Bridges are priority, then rail, then fuel. The streams go where the ground war demands, and the weather no longer decides if they can go. H2X makes cloud into a working medium. The invisible escort makes a net of instruments into a mitten. In a lab at Rechlin, a team powers a prototype meant to see 3 centimeters better. The bench trace tightens clean and crisp under perfect conditions. Field notes say the air is never perfect anymore. The engineer draws a careful line across a page and dates it. The date is the only part that will move forward. On a rain-pocked night, a Ju-88 crew lifts on a Zamesau scramble and levels into a ceiling that eats stars. The controller talks them toward a stream he can only feel by schedule and static. The crew carry a small box that can sometimes hear British 10 centimeters sets. H2X at 3 centimeters lives beyond the edge of its comfort. They chase a bearing that never hardens. The pilot keeps flying the headings because flying the headings is all there is. He lands with fuel low and eyes red and says the set heard the sky but not the enemy. At Thorpe Abbott's, a debrief runs long. The waist gunner tries to describe how the Chaff looked in weak moonlight, a slow constellation falling through a corridor of contrails. The intelligence officer writes it down without poetry. He marks flak zones by altitude band and time notes late bursts and scattered patterns, records a fighter contact that came close and then faded into nothing. On another line he writes, RCM effective. There is no victory board entry for a wall of noise. The result is written in ships that get back, and crews who fold into trucks looking older than their ages. The bunker near Cuxhaven gets one last phone call before dawn. Report the picture. The Freya hand says what he can. Movement in sector returns. Unstable bearings, not dependable, probable stream outbound. He hangs up, caps the pencil, and stands in the doorway while grey light pushes the dunes into shape. He thinks of the first time he saw a raid look like weather, and how he told himself it was a fault. It was not. It was a choice made on the other side of the sea, built into checklists, racks and training, flown every day until the line on his scope stopped being a line. At midday, an order reaches the site to power down if ground forces approach. The chief signs the paper, logs tubes saved, writes one more dry sentence about equipment serviceable. The men coil cables that still shine like new. The dish parks at 0 azimuth for the first time in months. The room goes quiet enough to hear the sand moving against the blast door. He closes the book. Across the channel, engines start again. Fuel trucks move. A crew chief checks a jammer rack with the back of a hand to feel its warmth. The Mickey ship on lead takes a chalk mark off the board and rolls. A navigator looks at a circle on glass that will become a city he cannot see. The escort in the ether is already awake. In the last shift's log, the final line reads, heavy interference throughout, target picture indeterminate, operations by clock. It is not a complaint. It is a record of what the German network could still do at the end, and what it could no longer do once the Americans turned the spectrum into a shield, and then made that shield routine.